I gave my thoughts, Mike. I have a hard time believing that they were sitting on evidence of their crimes for a long time and just without shredding them or deleting them. I just have a hard time believing it's still there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's a strange sequence that we ended up here. It looks like there was somebody maybe inside DOJ who gave the this Justice Department memo to Axios. It doesn't look like the DOJ has formally acknowledged this at this point. As of the time of our recording, there's been very loud cricket sounds that I hear outside, but no kind of official acknowledgement. Yeah, in fact, Axios even deleted the document that they uploaded so that even in the article itself, you can no longer see it. But of course, the internet pulled that immediately. And now we're here where the official word is no client list. The suicide estimation by the FBI is now being ratified by DOJ. And this is definitely an escalation in terms of what had been hinted at through FBI earlier. DOJ is the keeper of the interagency and the interagency secrets. FBI is, of course, primarily for domestic intelligence. It's the intelligence arm of DOJ, but FBI is firewalled from CIA on many things. And it has been my contention all along that what you're dealing with Epstein is the CIA network, not the FBI network. In fact, the FBI, to the extent that this was an intelligence asset or an intelligence network around Epstein, the FBI would be studiously firewalled off from that in order to avoid giving a legal predicate for federal law enforcement to make arrests of folks who were involved in U.S. statecraft or any sort of international statecraft or intelligence that the U.S. wants to keep going.
Mike, you say CIA. Describe what you think. I mean, I'm assuming some of this is theory because we're never going to know, but what do you think Epstein was to the CIA?
Well, I think Epstein was working with the CIA in the early 1980s at the very start of his career after he left Bear Stearns. In 1981, right after leaving Bear Stearns, Jeffrey Epstein created a one-person for-profit company in his one-bedroom New York apartment. It was called the Intercontinental Assets Group, and it held itself out as a international bounty hunter for high net worth individuals to both recover money and shield money internationally. So the right away in 1981, he starts this company that basically helps that helped royalty and high net worth individuals basically recover loan debts or assets owed to them that were held in cryptic offshore bank accounts, as well as helping them structure their own assets in a way that would make it difficult or impossible for others to collect those assets. And in 1982, just 1 year into that, he got a fake passport, an Austrian passport listing his residence as Saudi Arabia. This is a fake passport. This was recovered by the FBI in 2019 when they drilled a hole in Jeffrey Epstein's safe and recovered this. Prosecutors held this passport up at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. This fake passport was so good that it was able to go through 4 different country checkpoints. It had a false name, but Jeffrey Epstein's photo, so that he could get back and forth. And why Saudi Arabia? Well, because Jeffrey Epstein, one of his main clients for the group that he set up in 1981, was Adnan Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi was the CIA arms runner for the Iran-Contra affair. When Congress blocked the U.S. federal government through a congressional law called the Bolin Amendment, with the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, banning any U.S. funds from being directed to the overthrow of the Nicaraguan Sandinista government. And the Reagan White House and National Security Council and Central Intelligence Agency wanted to do it anyway. they were left with a problem, which was that the CIA had been neutered during the Jimmy Carter years. There had been prohibitions on the categories of covert activity it could do, and the Boland Amendment from Congress blocked them from using U.S. aid funds or State Department funds to run the operation. Enter Jeffrey Epstein and Adnan Khashoggi, his client. During the Iran-Contra affair, which dogged the entire Reagan administration when all this came out, the U.S. was selling arms together with Israel to Iran, which is kind of ironic as the current geopolitics of Israel-Iran play out around missiles flying overhead earlier this month between those two countries. Israel and the U.S. were selling weapons to Iran at that time through Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi arms dealer, who had been working with the CIA for 30 years. In fact, this all came out in formal under oath testimony from the Paris office of BCCI, which was the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, one of the largest banks in the world, which was effectively a CIA proprietary bank for running arms to the Mujahideen when the CIA was creating the Islamo terrorist network that would later become Al Qaeda and then ISIS. Adnan Khashoggi was a client of that bank together with the CIA, and the head of the Paris branch said that Adnan Khashoggi personally told him that he was working for the Central Intelligence Agency, and Jeffrey Epstein was his money bundler. This is at the height of the Cold War, mind you. And so you see this relationship going back to the early 1980s. In 1985, Jeffrey Epstein becomes linked up with Les Wexner in Columbus, Ohio. Les Wexner was the head of what at the time was the largest retailer in the entire United States, Limited Brands, famous for Victoria's Secret and many others. Les Wexner's tax attorney, Arthur Shapiro, was murdered in a gangland-style assassination in 1985, the day before he was set to testify in an IRS grand jury investigation. The IRS had been looking into the Wexner Empire's finances and failure to, I think, file taxes for something like 5 years and 7 years of investigation. Arthur Shapiro, who ran that, was supposed to testify to the IRS grand jury just one day before he was gunned down. It was right after that Jeffrey Epstein appears to meet Les Wexner and then go on to have durable power of attorney over the entire Wexner enterprise. It was then in 1993, Jeffrey Epstein personally negotiated the transfer of Air America, which would then become Southern Air Transport, a CIA proprietary airline, straight from Miami, where it got busted as part of the Iran-Contra gun trafficking and narcotics trafficking in order to run this illicit operation in Iran-Contra. That very airline used Jeffrey Epstein was a critical part in the structuring of this CIA operation. He then negotiated the transfer of that CIA airliner straight to Columbus, Ohio, where the Wexner Empire was based, for the primary purpose of transporting the Limited's cargo between Ohio and Hong Kong, which is another one of these narco states. Hong Kong was won by the British during the Opium Wars and has been kind of a lawless gun and drug running zone ever since. How does one get to be the financial bundler for the CIA's main illicit arms trafficker in the Middle East without having any scrutiny from the Central Intelligence Agency? How does one personally negotiate the transfer of a CIA proprietary airline? By the way, Southern Air Transport declared bankruptcy in Columbus, Ohio, the very day the CIA put out an acknowledgement of Air America's role in the gun running and narco trafficking in Iran-Contra. Subsequent to that, the U.S. State Department personally made Jeffrey Epstein the tenant on the lease for one of the second largest residence in all of New York City. This residence was seized from the government of Iran as the U.S. was putting sanctions on it, and then personally leased out to Jeffrey Epstein. How do you have the State Department as your personal landlord? Do you think you or I, Jesse, could score something like that? The State Department then ended up in a legal dispute with Jeffrey Epstein because Jeffrey Epstein subleased that apartment to the defense lawyer for the French Connection and Pizza Connection drug scandals, where you had CIA involvement in narco trafficking that was effectively hushed over in this trial through this very defense lawyer that Jeffrey Epstein then leased the State Department building seized from Iran from. What I'm trying to communicate here is that every aspect of the Jeffrey Epstein story is part of the restructuring of intelligence work after the scandals of the 1970s, when the CIA was barred from doing activity directly, and that's when USAID came into the picture and took the baton from CIA, and the NGO apparatus that we're now living under with the National Endowment for Democracy and Internews and the U.S. Agency for U.S. Institute of Peace, and the web of private contractors and private financiers in order to be the front men for CIA operations. Jeffrey Epstein was present at creation of that entire apparatus. There is zero chance on God's green earth that there are no CIA files on this guy. And the fact that this Justice Department has effectively pointed us to the FBI when this is a CIA job is not a good look for transparency.
Dang, that is so much, Mike. Okay, so connect these worlds to me then. For most people, that is new information, as you always bring us. But most people know Epstein is this filthy trafficker of underage girls with very powerful men, royalty, billionaires, things like that. How does he end up there? Is it simply blackmail? Is that it? You're just hoovering up blackmail information because you bring in a former president, to cavort with underage women?
I don't believe I've not seen evidence, I should say, that Jeffrey Epstein was directly involved in blackmail operations. It would surprise me if he was. And I've studied this as much as anyone really humanly can. And the blackmail allegations, now certainly the CIA had a history of doing Jeffrey Epstein style sexual blackmail operations. Actually, in March of this year, during the ODNI declassification of the JFK files, there was a very Jeffrey Epstein-like figure named Robert Mayhew, who the CIA was working with to do sexual entrapment of high-level political figures. And certainly the Jeffrey Epstein story can very much looks to be similar to the Robert Mayhew story. But the problem is once you're directly involved with blackmail of, say, a target in that network, word gets around quickly. You lose access to both that asset who is under the duress and coercion, as well as all of that asset's friends who they may tell and say, oh my God, this guy's blackmailing me. And then everybody in the network clams up. And when you're talking about a network of that size, I think that the access agent theory around Epstein is far closer to the mark, where what you have is a deal maker. What you have is someone, think about the Iran-Contra situation, for example. You're talking about a very, very complex supply chain for illegal transport of illicit arms for a covert, deniable operation that spans 4 different countries. In that case, it was the U.S., Israel, the UK, and Saudi Arabia, as well as their counterparts in Iran. So that's 5 countries who all need to keep it super hush-hush quiet. You need to move through a web of Cayman Islands offshore bank accounts and Panamanian offshore bank accounts. You need 3 dozen shell companies. You need the tax attorneys and legal teams. You need basically backdoor skid greasing and private commitments from a range of disparate individuals who stretch business, finance, diplomacy, intelligence. So somebody's got to know all those people, and somebody's got to set up those deals and keep formal government channels at the U.S. side out of it. Jeffrey Epstein was clearly doing that in the 1980s. He clearly retained involvement in that throughout at least the early 1990s, and then went on to this very high profile, banking life while he was power of attorney over the Les Wexner empire, and then proceeded to have a life of essentially cavorting with all of the world's richest and most famous people. To the extent that he continued to do intelligence work at that point, I would say certainly access and deal brokering would be sufficient to explain what he was doing. Now, it could be the case that he was passing on information to intelligence agencies, and separate folks within the intelligence world or other back channels may have used that information collected by Epstein. But I don't principally think of Epstein as being a blackmail story. I think of it as being a deal maker story. And that helps, having the capital to do that, the financial capital to do those deals, is essentially what makes the deals work, that he can negotiate them. And running, Epstein and company is private arm for doing that after his international Intercontinental Assets Group agency folded up in the early 90s. It looks like that's when he transitioned into this more banking empire role that he had. But that's how I see the story. So it would not surprise me if there was no evidence around Epstein and blackmail. But that actually does not make the picture any less dark than it is, because if Epstein was still being used for deal making, for back channel diplomacy, for intelligence gathering, I think the American people, and frankly the entire world, has a right to know that. And given the state of the DOJ's handling of this, it doesn't look like we're going to be getting answers on that anytime soon.
Mike, okay, so let me ask this question this way then. If he is a guy with connections, and it certainly sounds like he has many, to CIA, possibly FBI, we don't know, but either way, these organizations have a long storied history of protecting criminals who are assets to them. Everyone knows that. I brought up John Donnelly and Whitey Bulger in the open of the show. That's how it works, right? How does he end up in trouble? He ends up getting convicted of crimes. He ends up in jail. Who did he make angry?
Well, so when you're talking about the sheer number of witnesses and scale of the operation, things can get away. And oftentimes there's a turf battle between CIA and the State Department. This happened, for example, in the case of Rolando Masfer in the late 1960s. Rolando Masfer was a Cuban exile who was brought over by the Central Intelligence Agency in the late 50s, early 1960s, and was intimately involved in running a network of about 150 to 200 exile Cubans who were involved in everything from narcotics trafficking to gun running as part of the CIA activities in Operation Mongoose and the regionalization of the conflict against the government of Cuba. Now, so Masfer was working directly for and with the CIA for a time, and then he became a little too big for his britches, went rogue. The State Department he thought that the JFK administration, this is how he ended up in the JFK files, these documents I can describe to you here. He ended up believing that the JFK administration was too soft on Castro, that it was not aggressive enough, it was not moving quickly enough, and that he needed to take matters into his own hands using the mercenary network that the CIA had helped him cultivate. And when the State Department, the Western Hemisphere officials told him that they were prohibiting him from unilaterally attempting a military coup in Cuba, the plan, Masfer's plan was to take about 200 mercenaries to invade the island of Haiti and then use the Haitian docks as a means to essentially do a military attack on Cuba. The State Department said, "Don't do it. We are formally blocking you from doing this." He went ahead and tried to do it anyway. Customs and Border Patrol caught him and his men on the docks of Miami as they tried to run this private operation. They prosecuted them under the State Department, then petitioned the DOJ to arrest Masfer for violations of the Diplomatic Neutrality Act. The CIA then intervened and told the Justice Department, don't prosecute them. So what you had was a proxy war. The State Department said, listen, these Cuban groups are getting out of control. We need to prosecute Masfer in order to send a message to all the other Cuban military groups who are thinking about doing this in the future, that they can't just set their own foreign policy on this. The CIA said, if you arrest Masfer, all of this is going to get out. We're already under so much heat from the Ramparts disclosures and from Senate investigations into CIA malfeasance. If the extent of the Masfer CIA network comes out in a criminal trial, it will undermine all CIA activities out of the Miami branch. It will become a massive international scandal. And so the Justice Department was torn between the State Department's directive to pursue prosecution and the CIA's directive to stop prosecution and let him skate free. And effectively, they ended up in a compromise. The State Department is on top of CIA. The CIA formally has a relationship to state just like FBI has to the Justice Department. Everything CIA does has to be authorized by state first. It's supposed to be the covert arm of the State Department, the same way the FBI is the covert arm of the Justice Department. So the State Department won that tug of war. Masfer was indicted by the Justice Department, but the conditions put on it were that the CIA was able to have a DOJ attorney embedded from CIA in order to midwife the prosecution and in order to ensure that no evidence was admitted in trial that revealed the CIA network involved. That is, they had the government employees petition the government prosecutors petition the judge to not allow any lines of evidence that might be brought up by the defendants that might reveal sources and methods or anyone in the CIA adjacent network. So they got the prosecution, but they kept the CIA secrecy. By the way, this is all public now, thanks to Tulsi Gabbard. These you can look at the 1966 and 1967 CIA memos on Rolando Masfer in the March 2025 releases if you want to see all these documents. I also did a 1-hour video presentation for my subscribers on X on this as well. But I think this is what happened in the Epstein case. I think Epstein was clearly CIA, whether in a formal or informal, more likely an informal role in the sense that the CIA would have had analyst memos, cables, a code name for Epstein, but not necessarily on payroll or a formal informant. And then I think you also have the international side of this, which is all the CIA activity that is done jointly with British intelligence, Israeli intelligence, Saudi intelligence, and I think a lot of those other governments may be exerting pressure on the Trump administration or the Justice Department in order to not reveal their role.
Mike, you are the best, my man. Go subscribe to him, by the way, on X and hoover up that video. Mike, my brother, as always, thank you. I appreciate you very much.